In this video, we tell the stories of three awful yet genius serial killers that outsmarted the FBI. Not everyone will be able to stomach this video until the end. If that's you, please click away, take care of yourself, and we'll see you in the next one. It started with a mistake. Not mine, his. Agent Carter. The way he followed me out of that diner, half a block back, too casual to be a coincidence. I'd seen it before. The quick glance when I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The way he lingered at the corner, pretending to check his phone. Amateur. But he wasn't. That much became clear the next day when I saw him again. Different suit, different tie, but the same dead giveaway. The eyes. Too alert, too focused. He was a professional, and I'd been careless. Somewhere along the line, I'd left a thread loose, and Carter had picked it up. Now he was pulling. I'd been running this game for years, and in all that time, no one had come this close. Not even the media's so-called profilers. They thought they knew me, but Carter was different. He didn't just know my patterns. He felt them. It was almost like he could think the way I did. That made him dangerous. The first real close call happened a week later. I was sitting in my car outside a bank downtown, watching a woman. A perfect mark. She took the same route home every evening, always alone, always distracted by her phone. I was about to pull out of the lot when I spotted him. Carter, leaning against a lamppost across the street, pretending to read a newspaper. My chest tightened, and for the first time in years, I felt cornered. I'd parked in the farthest corner of the lot, the shadows swallowing most of the car. If I started the engine, he'd hear it. If I got out, he'd see me. For a moment I froze. This wasn't part of the plan. Then slowly I reached into the glove box, pulled out an old ball cap and shoved it low over my face. I stepped out of the car, careful to keep my profile turned away, and walked toward the opposite exit. Every step felt like an eternity. He didn't move. Not until I rounded the corner and glanced back. He was gone. That was the moment I knew I had to change everything. My routine, my appearance, my targets. Carter wasn't going to stop. He'd seen something in me, something no one else had noticed. And now he was closing in. 2 nights later, I tested him. A decoy. I left a trail, fake receipts, a coffee cup with a partial print, a note written in my hand but signed with a false name. I led him to an old warehouse on the edge of town, watching from a rooftop across the street. He showed up, just like I knew he would, alone but armed. Smart. He searched the place for hours, checking every corner, every shadow. When he found nothing, he left. But not before looking up at the rooftop where I'd been. For a split second our eyes met, and I swear I saw him smile. He was baiting me too. The next day, I moved to a new city, burned the old IDs, shaved my head, switched out my car. I thought I'd shaken him. For a month, things were quiet. No sign of Carter, no shadow trailing me through the streets. I started to think he'd lost the thread. Then came the train station. I was boarding a late-night train to Denver, my bag slung over one shoulder, ticket in hand. The platform was crowded, people shuffling on and off, a symphony of motion and noise. I stepped onto the train, found my seat and settled in. That's when I saw him. 2 rows back, 3 seats over. Carter. For a second I couldn't breathe. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he knew. My mind raced. If I stayed, he'd make his move eventually. If I ran, I'd confirm his suspicions. The train doors closed, the engine hummed to life, and I made my choice. I stood, walked to the rear of the car, and slipped into the restroom. My hands were shaking as I locked the door. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, the fluorescent light casting harsh shadows on my face. I had about 60 seconds before he came after me, maybe less. I pulled a screwdriver from my bag and pried open the maintenance panel beneath the sink. Behind it was a maze of wires and pipes, just enough space to wedge myself in. It wasn't comfortable, but it was tight enough to stay hidden. I left the restroom door unlocked, knowing he'd check there first. Sure enough, I heard the door creak open a few seconds later, followed by his footsteps. He paused, probably scanning the room, then stepped back out. The train rattled on, and I stayed frozen in my hiding spot until the next station. I slipped out of the train and disappeared into the crowd before he even realized I was gone. But the close calls were piling up, and each one left me more shaken than the last. Carter wasn't just chasing me. He was closing the distance, one step at a time. The final confrontation came in a motel room just outside Chicago. I'd been staying there under a fake name, keeping my head down. But that night, I felt it. The weight of someone's eyes on me. I glanced through the blinds and saw him, standing across the parking lot, his silhouette sharp against the glow of a street lamp. I had two options, run or fight. Running hadn't worked before, and something in me, something dark and tired, was done running. I grabbed the knife from under my pillow and waited. He knocked on the door once, then again, louder this time. "FBI," he called. "Open up." I didn't answer. The silence stretched thin. Then the door splintered as he kicked it in, his gun raised, his eyes locked on mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. The tension was electric, a live wire ready to snap. "You've been busy," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. I smiled. "So have you." He stepped closer, his gun unwavering. "It's over." "Not yet," I said, lunging forward. The fight was brutal. The knife slashed, the gun fired, the room a blur of chaos and violence. In the end, I escaped. Barely. A broken window, a leap into the night, blood trailing behind me. Carter was injured, but alive. And I knew it wouldn't be the last time I saw him. Even now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel him out there, still hunting me, still pulling at the threads. And me? I'm still running, still watching, still waiting for the next close call. Because that's the game we play. Hunter and prey. The question is, which one am I? I've never told anyone this before, but it's been weighing on me for years. It's like a shadow that follows me, no matter where I go. Maybe saying it out loud will finally make it easier to deal with, though I doubt it. My name and where I work don't matter. Those details won't change anything now. What matters is the case, the one that got under my skin, consumed my life, and how he got away. It all started 5 years ago. Back then, I was part of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, a specialized team that profiles and hunts dangerous criminals. It's not the kind of job you can just switch off at the end of the day. Every detail, every failure stays with you, and this one stuck with me more than most. We had been tracking this one killer for over a year, and each time we thought we were close, he slipped through our fingers. He was smart, meticulous, and always ahead of us. He didn't just kill, he taunted us, left messages designed to twist the knife a little deeper. The media called him the Harbinger because of the cryptic notes he left at his crime scenes, each one darker and more haunting than the last. The first victim was a young woman found in a quiet park just outside the city. Her body wasn't just dumped, it was staged, like a disturbing piece of art. Her hands were folded over her chest, her eyes wide open and staring at the sky as if frozen in time. The note he left near her read, "Beauty in stillness." It was chilling, and it was only the beginning. By the time the third victim was found, we realized these murders weren't random. The notes, the careful positioning of the bodies, it was all part of something bigger. He had a plan, but no matter how hard we worked, we couldn't figure out what it was. Our first real break came from a tiny, almost insignificant mistake. On the fourth victim's clothing, we found a single strand of hair. It wasn't his. He was far too careful for that. But it belonged to someone connected to him. That someone was a woman named Julia, who had gone missing about a week earlier. Her family hadn't reported it. They thought she'd gone on a trip, but we knew better. We traced Julia's trail to a rundown motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where people go when they don't want to be found. The room was empty, but it was clear someone had been staying there recently. The bed was unmade, and half-eaten takeout containers littered the small table. But what really caught our attention was the wall. It was covered in photos of the victims, maps with red circles marking locations, newspaper clippings, and notes scrawled in red ink. It was like stepping into the mind of the killer, a window into his twisted logic. Among all the chaos on the wall, one photo stood out to me. It was of a young boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old. He wasn't one of the victims, and there was no note attached to the photo. Just a name, Elliot. There was something about the boy's expression that sent a chill down my spine, calm, almost defiant. I didn't know it then, but that photo would become the key to everything. The motel room led us to a cabin deep in the woods, about 2 hours outside the city. We mobilized quickly, hoping to catch him off guard. When we arrived, the place was deserted. Almost. In the center of the cabin was a small wooden table with a single piece of paper on it. The note read, "You're getting warmer." My gut told me we had just missed him, that he had been there watching us approach. But there was no sign of him, no trail to follow, and no way to know where he would strike next. Weeks turned into months, and the killings stopped. For a while, we thought maybe he had moved to another city or state. We started to let our guard down. Then the bodies started appearing again. But this time, the notes weren't about the victims. They were about us, about me. "Do you see it yet?" one read. Another said, "You're chasing ghosts." It was maddening, but it also told us something important. He was watching us. He knew what we were doing, sometimes before we even did. We started looking inward, wondering if there was a leak in the team, but everyone checked out. It was as if he could predict our every move, like he was always one step ahead. Then, out of nowhere, Julia, the woman we had been looking for, walked into a police station in the middle of the night. She was shaken but unharmed. Her memories were fragmented, disjointed. She remembered a calm man's voice, being blindfolded, and soft music playing in the background. She said he let her go, but before he did, he whispered something in her ear. "Tell them I'm not done." After that, I started to unravel. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the case. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo of Elliot. I didn't know why, but I felt like he was the missing piece of the puzzle. I started digging through old records, looking for anything I could find about a boy named Elliot. And then I found it. Elliot Monroe, reported missing 20 years ago. His father, Robert Monroe, had been the prime suspect, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. The case went cold, and Elliot was presumed dead. But here's the thing. Robert Monroe didn't disappear. He changed his name. And that new name matched one we had found in the motel room. We thought we finally had him. When we raided Robert Monroe's house, it was like stepping into a nightmare. The basement was a shrine to his crimes, photos of his victims, trophies he had taken, and journals describing every twisted detail of every kill. But he wasn't there. Instead, we found another note pinned to the wall with a knife. It read, "You're too late." The last time I saw him was at a train station. We got a tip that someone matching his description had bought a ticket to Chicago. I'll never forget the way he looked at me as he boarded the train. Calm, almost amused. He knew we couldn't touch him. By the time we confirmed his identity, the train was already pulling away. We alerted the authorities in Chicago, but it was no use. He was gone. The case remains open, but deep down, I know we'll never catch him. He's too smart, too careful. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, watching me, laughing at how I failed. I've thought about leaving the bureau, but what good would that do? This case will follow me wherever I go. I still see Elliot's face in my nightmares. Not the boy in the photo, but the man he became. The man who outsmarted us all. And every time I wake up, I hear his voice in my head whispering, "Do you see it yet?" I suppose you're here to understand me. That's what they all want, right? To put me in a box, slap a label on it, and feel satisfied that they've figured me out. But the truth is, you'll never truly get it. None of you will. I didn't start out planning this. It wasn't some childhood dream, if that's what you're imagining. I was ordinary once. Went to school, got decent grades, had friends. I blended in. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. People always ask about a moment, a single event that made me who I am. I've thought about that a lot, and the answer is, there wasn't one. It was gradual, like water wearing down stone. Small cracks formed over time, and one day, I realized I wasn't like everyone else. The first time was almost an accident. Almost. There was this guy, a neighbor, always loud, always in my face. He'd leave his trash everywhere, let his dog tear up my lawn. One day I'd had enough. I'd been watching him, studying his habits. I knew when he left for work, when he came home, when he walked his dog. It was easy to find the right moment. He never saw it coming. Just a quick hit to the back of the head, and he was down. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something. Guilt, regret, fear. But there was nothing. Just silence. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. I'm not saying I planned everything after that, but I did learn from it. The police called it a robbery gone wrong, and I watched from my window as they swarmed his house, interviewing neighbors and collecting evidence. They didn't look at me twice. Why would they? I was the quiet one, the guy who kept to himself, invisible. After that, I started paying attention. To people, to patterns. It was fascinating how predictable everyone was. They went about their lives like clockwork, never noticing the eyes on them, never suspecting that someone could be watching their every move. It wasn't about hate or anger. It was about the game, finding the cracks, exploiting them, and knowing they'd never figure it out. The media called me the Raven after the second one. I never left notes or anything like that. I'm not a poet, but I guess they needed a name. It's funny how they try to make it all so dramatic. Truth is, I didn't pick my victims for any particular reason. Sometimes it was convenience, sometimes curiosity. They were just there. The third one was different, though. She was a challenge, a detective, if you can believe it. I'd been following her for weeks, watching her piece together cases, hunting people like me. She was sharp, sharper than most. That made it exciting. I'd never gone after someone like her before, someone who could fight back. I planned everything down to the second, where she parked her car, the route she took home, even the locks on her front door. She almost caught me too, almost. I remember the way her face changed when she realized I was there, waiting in the dark. At first, it was shock, then anger. She lunged at me, and for a moment I thought she might actually win, but she was too slow, too predictable. When it was over, I stayed for a while, looking around her apartment. There were photos of her family, books on criminology, a half-eaten sandwich on the counter. She'd been in the middle of something, living her life, and now, nothing. I don't know why, but that stuck with me. They came close to catching me after that. Her colleagues were relentless, pulling apart every detail, connecting dots I hadn't even considered. I had to lay low for a while, change my routine. It was frustrating being stuck in the shadows, but it also gave me time to think. I started planning my next move, something bigger, something that would really get their attention. The cabin was perfect. Isolated, surrounded by woods, no nosy neighbors. I spent weeks setting it up, making sure everything was just right. The first time I brought someone there, I wasn't sure how it would go. It's one thing to act in the heat of the moment, but this was different. This was calculated, deliberate. I'd thought it might feel cold, detached, but it didn't. It felt like art. Every detail mattered, from the way I arranged the room to the message I left behind. It wasn't about taunting the cops, though. It was about telling a story. My story. They found the cabin eventually, of course. I wanted them to. By then, I'd moved on, left just enough behind to keep them chasing shadows. I watched the news coverage from a motel room 100 miles away, smiling at the way they tried to piece it all together. They didn't realize they were playing my game. The funny thing about the cabin, they thought it was the beginning of my story, but it wasn't. By the time they were piecing together the evidence, I'd already set up something new. Another place, another setup. It's like a puzzle with no solution. They don't understand that I'm not playing by their rules. I never was. I know what you're thinking. Why am I telling you all this? Isn't it risky? Maybe. But I've always liked risks. Besides, it's not like you can stop me. I've changed my name, my appearance, my entire life. I could be anyone, anywhere. You've probably walked past me on the street, sat next to me on a bus, maybe even smiled at me in passing. And that's the beauty of it. I'm invisible. Just another face in the crowd. The funny thing is, I don't even think of myself as a monster. I'm just different. I see the world in a way most people can't. They're stuck in their little routines, their little bubbles, never noticing how fragile it all is. One crack, one push, and everything falls apart. That's what I do. I find the cracks. You think you're safe because you've locked your doors, because you've set up cameras or bought a dog. But safety is an illusion, a flimsy shield people cling to so they can sleep at night. I've walked past houses with lights on, doors locked, and alarms armed, and all I see are the weak spots, the cracks. There's always a way in. So, here we are. You, looking for answers, and me, giving you just enough to keep you guessing. Maybe you'll catch me someday. Maybe not. But even if you do, it won't change anything. You'll put me in a cage, study me, write papers about me, and the world will keep spinning, oblivious to how close it is to breaking. But you won't catch me. Not yet. I'm too careful for that, too smart. So go ahead, try to figure me out. Just remember, you're not hunting me, I'm hunting you.